What if I told you that belief in yourself isn't just a mindset, it's a biological process? That it's not just about positive thinking, it's about how your brain wires itself for possibility, how your nervous system prepares you to take action, and how your internal state shapes what you think is possible in the external world. Tonight, we're not just going to talk about motivation in vague terms, we're going to break it down. We're going to look at 10 specific ways you can train your mind and body, yes, literally train them to believe in yourself and achieve what I call cool things. Things that matter to you. Things that light up your dopamine circuits, shift your sense of agency, and rewire your brain for momentum. Some of what I'll share is rooted in neuroscience, some in psychology, some in sheer lived human experience. But all of it is actionable. All of it is based on how belief works at the level of circuits and behavior. Because here's the truth, self-belief isn't some mystical trait you either have or don't. Eat something you can build step by step. Self-belief begins in the nervous system. Train it like a muscle, not a mood. This isn't a metaphorical idea, it's grounded in how the human brain and body function together to create what we experience as belief, motivation, and identity. At the core of all self-directed change is the nervous system, the brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves that process signals from the environment and from inside your body. When we talk about belief, especially belief in oneself, we're talking about a perception that arises from patterns of neural activity. These patterns are shaped over time, not just by what we think, but by what we think. That's why belief can be trained, because the nervous system is plastic. It's capable of rewiring itself based on experience, repetition, and targeted effort. The common misconception is that confidence must come before action. But neuroscience shows us it's the opposite. Action comes first and confidence follows. When you repeatedly do something that challenges you and survive it, even if you fail, you start sending signals to the brain that you're the kind of person who takes action, who handles difficulty, who persists. Over time, these signals reinforce circuits in the prefrontal cortex and other areas involved in planning and decision-making. Your brain builds a new model of who you are based on behavior, not emotion. That's why belief isn't about waiting until you feel ready. It's about building readiness through reps, just like training a muscle. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change in response to experience, is driven in part by neurochemicals like dopamine, acetylcholine, and norepinephrine. When you attempt something new, your brain pays closer attention. It releases these chemicals to mark the experience as significant. If you repeat the action, your neurons start firing together more consistently. Neurons that fire together, wire together is more than a phrase, it's a foundational rule of how the brain learns. If you consistently act in a way that aligns with self-belief, your nervous system will eventually make that the default setting. The problem is most people think belief should feel easy, but belief is effortful. The systems in your brain responsible for effort and reward are tightly connected. When you exert effort, especially in pursuit of something meaningful, dopamine is released not just when you succeed, but during the process itself. That's important because it means you don't need to win big to start believing. You just need to keep showing up, doing the work, and letting your brain experience the satisfaction of trying. Over time, this changes your baseline. You shift from someone who hopes they can to someone who knows they will. Training your nervous system for belief means working with both your physiology and psychology. Breathwork, posture, even how you orient your eyes can influence the state of your nervous system. For example, when you feel anxious or uncertain, your breathing tends to become shallow and rapid. If you can take control of that, slow down your exhale. Anchor your breath in the diaphragm, you send signals to the brain that the environment is safe. This reduces activity in the amygdala and shifts you back into a state where you can take action. Similarly, upright posture and forward eye gaze signal alertness and readiness, activating systems in the brainstem and cortex that are linked to motivation. These are simple levers you can pull to train your nervous system to support belief. Self-belief also involves regulating your internal narratives. The brain operates heavily on prediction. It uses past experience to guess what will happen next. If you constantly tell yourself that you're not capable, that you'll fail, or that things won't work out, your brain takes those as inputs and builds models that filter your perception. You literally stop seeing opportunities and evidence that contradict your negative self-talk. But if you change that narrative consciously and repeatedly, you can shift the model. Again, repetition is key. One positive statement won't change the system, but regular intentional shifts in language paired with action can. Think of belief not as something you either have or lack, but as a skill. a skill that is built through feedback, stress, adjustment, and adaptation. Like strength training, it requires consistency, progressive overload, and recovery. Some days you'll feel strong, other days weak, but if you keep training the system, the baseline will improve. It's important to recognize that training the nervous system for belief often begins with discomfort. That discomfort is not a sign of failure. It's the signal that you're engaging the very circuits you want to strengthen. In fact, the greatest neuroplasticity occurs when we are slightly outside our comfort zone, not so far that we panic, but far enough that our brain knows this is important. This is why embracing friction is necessary for growth. Real self-belief is quiet, stable, and rooted in experience. It's not loud or performative. It's encoded in your nervous system over time through repeated actions that affirm who you are becoming. And just like any kind of training, it must be deliberate. You don't build physical strength by accident. You don't build belief that way either. You decide, you act, you adjust, and your nervous system adapts. Small wins trigger dopamine. Use them strategically to build momentum. Dopamine is not just a pleasure chemical, it's fundamentally a molecule of motivation. It helps reinforce behaviors, drive action, and encode learning. When we talk about momentum, we are really talking about how dopamine levels shift in the brain and body to create a forward-moving state. This isn't just theoretical, it's observable in brain scans and measurable in behavior. Small wins, even micro-accomplishments, are powerful because they release dopamine in key areas of the brain like the ventral tegmental area, vita, and nucleus accumbens. This dopamine release doesn't just make you feel good, it creates a signal that says, "That work, do more of it." Momentum is built when that signal gets repeated. This is why small wins are more than just confidence boosters. They are biochemical triggers that increase the likelihood of continued effort. They tell your nervous system that effort is worth it, and that forward motion leads to reward. Most people wait for big victories to validate themselves, but that's not how the brain builds sustainable belief. Big wins are rare, and if you wait for them, you risk stagnation or burnout. Small wins, on the other hand, are always within reach. When you finish a task you committed to, show up for a workout, send a message you were avoiding, or even make your bed after a low day, you activate this reward circuitry. This isn't about lowering standards, it's about understanding neurobiology. Dopamine works like a feedback loop. Every time you act, the brain evaluates the outcome. If there's even a small positive result, dopamine rises. This rise in dopamine increases focus, energy, and the willingness to pursue the next step. What's more interesting is that dopamine is anticipatory. You don't need to achieve the final goal to feel motivated, you just need to believe you're on the right path. Each small win confirms that belief and extends the loop. As a result, your brain begins to associate effort with progress, not just the finish line. That's key because it shifts your orientation from outcome-dependent motivation to process-driven momentum. To use this strategically, you need to structure your day and your goals around achievable milestones. The brain doesn't automatically track success, it tracks novelty and progress. So if you break a big goal into smaller, time-bound, invisible wins, you give your brain more chances to release dopamine. For example, instead of saying, "I want to launch a business," you say, "Today, I'll research 3 competitors and write 1 paragraph about my product idea." That's a win. Your nervous system recognizes it, encodes it, and wants more. Stack enough of these together and you start to build a pattern. The pattern becomes your identity. You begin to think of yourself not as someone who wants to succeed, but as someone who does things that lead to success. That identity, in turn, makes it easier to take future action, and the cycle continues. It's also important to understand the role of timing. Dopamine levels naturally fluctuate throughout the day, and you can use that to your advantage. Early in the day, your dopamine baseline is typically higher, which means your brain is more primed for effort and learning. That's why accomplishing a small win in the first 60 to 90 minutes after waking can set a biochemical tone for the rest of the day. It builds internal momentum before external demands hijack your attention. On the flip side, if you delay action or start the day with distractions, your dopamine system becomes less responsive and inertia builds. That's why the timing and frequency of small wins matter, not just that they happen, but when and how consistently. Additionally, celebrating small wins matters. This doesn't mean throwing a party after every task, but it does mean pausing consciously and acknowledging that you did something difficult or meaningful. That moment of recognition enhances the dopamine signal and helps consolidate the learning. It can be as simple as saying out loud, "That was hard and I did it," or physically writing down what you achieved. These are not gimmicks, they are forms of feedback. The brain needs feedback to know what to repeat. When you give it that feedback, it doesn't just reward the action, it strengthens the neural circuits that led to it. In a world where people are constantly exposed to unrealistic images of overnight success, understanding how dopamine works is grounding. It brings you back to biology. Your system is designed to reward progress, not perfection. Small wins are how you communicate to your brain that you're moving in the right direction. The more you do this, the more you build what researchers call self-efficacy, the belief that you can influence outcomes in your life. And self-efficacy is one of the strongest predictors of long-term achievement. It's not talent or even intelligence, it's the belief that your actions matter. And that belief is built step by step, win by win, through the strategic use of the dopamine system. Visualize success and effort. Your brain needs both to encode confidence. When people hear about visualization, they often think of imagining the end result, standing on a stage, finishing the race, holding the trophy, receiving the award. And that's powerful, but it's only part of the equation. Neuroscience shows that if you only visualize success without visualizing the effort it takes to get there, the brain registers the fantasy without preparing the body and mind for the reality. Confidence is not just about believing that things will go well, it's about knowing that you can handle the process, the struggle, the work, and the setbacks. For your nervous system to encode belief in your ability, it has to simulate both outcome and effort. When you visualize, you activate many of the same brain areas involved in actual performance. Motor cortex, premotor areas, and parts of the basal ganglia all light up when you mentally rehearse an action. This means visualization is not just mental, it's physiological. The body responds to imagined effort almost like it does to real effort. Olympic athletes, elite performers, military professionals, they all use visualization not just to see the finish line, but to mentally rehearse the climb, the push, the friction. That's because the more realistic your visualization is, the better prepared your brain becomes to execute under pressure. When you picture yourself doing the work, sweating, struggling, pushing through discomfort, you create neural templates that your brain can refer to when the real moment arrives. It's important to understand that confidence comes from familiarity. If your brain has never experienced something, even in simulated form, it will register that experience as foreign and possibly threatening. That activates the limbic system, increases cortisol, and makes it harder to perform. But if you've rehearsed the experience even just in your mind, the brain interprets it as less novel. It recognizes the pattern. It says, we've been here before. That familiarity lowers the fear response and increases your ability to stay composed. This is why effort-based visualization is so powerful. It doesn't just prepare you to win, it prepares you to work. There's also a chemical reason to include effort in visualization. Dopamine, the molecule of motivation, is released not only when you achieve a goal, but when you anticipate reward through effort. If you only imagine success, you may get a quick spike in dopamine, but it fades. When you imagine yourself putting in the hard work and overcoming challenges, you extend the dopamine arc. Your brain begins to associate the process with reward, not just the outcome. That's how you sustain motivation through long periods of difficulty, by training your brain to see effort itself as meaningful and worthwhile. To make this practical, you can build a short daily practice of visualization that includes two components. First, visualize the desired outcome, what it looks like, what it feels like, the emotional and sensory experience of having achieved what you're working toward. Second, shift the focus to the process. Imagine yourself waking up early to train, sitting with discomfort, staying focused when it's tempting to quit. Add detail. What are you wearing? What are you feeling? What obstacles show up, and how do you respond? The more vivid and specific the visualization, the more effectively your nervous system encodes it. Another key element is consistency. One visualization session won't change much, but repeated exposure to this mental rehearsal builds the same kind of neural adaptation that physical repetition does. It's not magic, it's biology. Just like practicing a skill builds myelin around the relevant neurons, mental rehearsal strengthens the neural pathways associated with that task. That's why consistent visualization, especially when tied to action, builds real-world confidence. You're not just imagining success, you're building the cognitive infrastructure to handle what it takes to get there. Visualizing effort also changes your relationship with discomfort. Most people avoid effort because their brain has labeled it as negative, painful, or threatening. But when you repeatedly picture yourself enduring effort and succeeding through it, the association changes. Your brain begins to see effort as part of the path, not as a signal to stop. This reshapes how you respond under pressure. Instead of interpreting struggle as a sign that something is wrong, you interpret it as confirmation that you're on the right track. This psychological shift can mean the difference between quitting and pushing through, between anxiety and focus, between hesitation and flow. Finally, integrating visualization into your daily routine helps align your internal state with your external goals. It becomes a tool for directing your attention, shaping your physiology, and preparing your system for performance. Over time, this daily mental training builds a deeper belief that you are not only capable of achieving great things, but that you are prepared for the real work it takes to make them happen. Your brain learns to anticipate challenge, your body learns to regulate under stress, and your identity begins to shift from someone who hopes for success to someone who expects it and is trained for it. Deliberate discomfort trains resilience. Confidence grows through controlled stress. The human nervous system is designed not just to survive discomfort, but to adapt to it. In fact, much of what we consider mental toughness, self-confidence, or grit can be traced back to how well a person has conditioned their body and mind to operate under stress. This doesn't mean seeking out chaos or trauma, but rather applying strategic doses of challenge in a controlled environment to train the systems that regulate fear, effort, and recovery. Confidence is not the absence of stress, it is the familiarity with it. It is the deep, embodied knowledge that you can stay grounded, focused, and capable even when things are hard. And the only way to develop that kind of confidence is through exposure to manageable stressors that push you just outside your comfort zone. The brain is a prediction machine. It's always trying to anticipate what's coming next. When something unfamiliar or intense happens, the brain tends to register it as a threat. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, which increases heart rate, respiration, and cortisol levels. This is not a malfunction, it's the body's way of mobilizing energy for action. But if you've never trained under stress, your system will interpret that physiological shift as panic. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and planning, will start to go offline. But if you've exposed yourself repeatedly to controlled discomfort, cold, heat, physical exertion, public speaking, fasting, or time-restricted challenges, your brain learns that stress doesn't always mean danger. It starts to predict survival instead of failure, and that shift in prediction is the essence of resilience. Deliberate discomfort can be physical, cognitive, or emotional. Cold exposure is a powerful physical example. When you put yourself in an ice bath or cold shower, your initial reaction is panic. The breath quickens, the heart races, the body wants to escape, but if you stay with it, breathe through it, and stay calm despite the discomfort, you train the vagus nerve to regulate your internal state. Over time, your body learns to tolerate more discomfort with less stress response. That adaptation transfers into other areas of life. You become more composed under pressure, not because life got easier, but because your system got stronger. On the cognitive level, discomfort might look like studying something difficult, having a hard conversation, or focusing for long periods without distraction. The key is to resist the impulse to escape. In a world of infinite digital distractions, the ability to stay focused is a kind of modern superpower. Training cognitive discomfort, deliberately doing things that require mental strain, builds the capacity to endure uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity. These are all traits associated with confident, high-functioning individuals, and they don't come naturally. They're trained through repetition. Emotionally, deliberate discomfort might look like vulnerability, telling the truth, or confronting failure. These things trigger emotional pain and social threat circuits in the brain, but every time you lean into those moments instead of avoiding them, your brain recalibrates its sense of what's dangerous. You begin to realize that you can survive discomfort, and this builds emotional range and internal stability. Confidence grows from this place of internal evidence, from knowing that you've done hard things before and that you can do them again. It's not about affirmations or hype, it's about reps. The concept of controlled stress is important here. You don't build resilience by overwhelming the system. That leads to burnout, shutdown, or trauma. Instead, you apply just enough challenge to provoke adaptation without tipping into chaos. In biology, this is called hormesis, a small dose of stress that makes the system stronger. The same principle applies psychologically. The right amount of discomfort at the right time, followed by recovery and integration, is what strengthens the nervous system. You become less reactive, more composed, and more grounded under pressure. When you train with discomfort intentionally, you start to see struggle not as a sign of weakness, but as a signal of growth. You stop interpreting your own fear or hesitation as failure. You start to trust the process of becoming stronger through exposure. This shift rewires your identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who doesn't run from challenge, someone who's capable of staying with difficulty until it passes or transforms. That's where real confidence lies, not in perfection, but in perseverance. Over time, this kind of training builds a baseline level of self-trust. You don't need to psych yourself up before every challenge. You don't need external validation. You've built a deep reserve of internal experience that tells your brain and body, I've been here before, and I know what to do. This is how controlled stress becomes a foundation for self-belief. It teaches you how to stay calm in the storm, how to maintain clarity in the noise, and how to keep moving forward even when things feel uncertain or hard. The more you condition yourself to handle discomfort, the less you fear it, and the more confident you become in your ability to take on whatever life demands. Environment shapes belief. Curate your surroundings for confidence. The brain is highly plastic, meaning it adapts constantly based on what it perceives and experiences. What many people overlook is how much the external environment feeds into internal narratives. The cues in your space, your workspace, your home, your social circle, your digital inputs all send signals to your nervous system about who you are, what you value, and what's possible for you. These signals can either support your confidence or erode it, sometimes without your conscious awareness. The key is to move from passive exposure to active curation. If you want to believe in yourself and achieve things that matter, you need to intentionally construct an environment that reflects and reinforces the mindset you want to embody. Your physical space is a great place to start. When your environment is chaotic or uninspiring, your brain has to use more energy to focus and stay regulated. Clutter increases cognitive load, which can lead to procrastination and self-doubt. But a space that's clean, orderly, and purposefully arranged sends a subconscious signal that you are in control. This is why making your bed, organizing your desk, or creating a visual display of your goals isn't trivial. It programs your brain to interpret your surroundings as stable and supportive. That sense of stability builds confidence by reducing mental friction. It becomes easier to believe in your ability to succeed when the space around you reflects intention, order, and clarity. Lighting, colors, sounds, and even smells play a role in regulating your nervous system. Natural light, for instance, helps regulate circadian rhythms and enhances dopamine production, which boosts mood and motivation. Dim, artificial lighting can dampen your alertness and energy. Curating your environment to include light, movement, and sensory inputs that align with your desired mental state makes a measurable difference in how confident and alert you feel throughout the day. That's not a matter of aesthetics, it's a matter of neurobiology. Social environment is another powerful influence. Humans are wired for social learning. The people you spend time with shape your beliefs about yourself and the world. This happens through a process called emotional contagion, where the nervous systems of individuals in close proximity begin to mirror one another. If you're constantly around people who complain, avoid responsibility, or undermine growth, your system begins to internalize those patterns. But if you surround yourself with people who strive, reflect, and take action, who normalize growth and resilience, you start to embody those traits by association. This doesn't mean cutting people off in a reactionary way. It means noticing how people affect your energy and your thoughts, and choosing to spend more time with those who elevate you and less with those who drain you. Digital environment is just as critical. Every notification, post, article, or video you consume sends signals to your brain about what's relevant, important, and possible. Doom scrolling or obsessively watching curated highlight reels of others' lives can create a distorted reality that leads to comparison, inadequacy, and paralysis. But when you curate your digital inputs following creators who educate, motivate, or challenge you constructively, you give your brain more healthy data points. You can train your algorithm to feed you confidence-building content by what you choose to engage with. This gives you a subtle but powerful form of environmental control that helps reshape your internal dialogue. Another piece of environmental design involves visual anchors, cues in your space that trigger specific beliefs or behaviors. This could be a whiteboard with your goals, a quote that resonates, an object that represents a past victory, or even a picture that connects you to a meaningful vision. These aren't just decorative. They're tools that direct attention. And attention is the gateway to belief. What you see often becomes what you focus on. And what you focus on, your brain begins to believe. Routines also create a kind of environmental structure. When your day includes time-blocked windows for learning, moving, recovering, or reflecting. You establish predictable rhythms. Predictability calms the nervous system, increases your ability to stay present, and reduces decision fatigue. This frees up cognitive energy to invest in action and learning, which both feed into self-efficacy. Small routines, even things like journaling, walking, or checking in with a mentor, build microenvironments within the day that reinforce a growth-oriented identity. Over time, these rituals become a kind of scaffolding that supports higher levels of performance and confidence. One of the most empowering shifts you can make is to stop waiting for your environment to inspire you and start designing it too. Confidence isn't something you wait to feel, it's something you build with repetition, structure, and alignment. The more aligned your external world is with your internal goals, the less resistance you encounter. You don't have to constantly will yourself into action when your environment is quietly nudging you forward. It becomes a kind of silent partner in your development. Your space holds you accountable. Your people reflect your standards. Your inputs elevate your perspective. And the system as a whole begins to signal to your brain, this is who I am now, and this is the kind of life I'm capable of building. Action builds evidence. Confidence is the memory of past victories. Belief in yourself doesn't start in the mind, it starts in behavior. You can't think your way into self-trust, you have to earn it through action. Every time you act in alignment with your goals, your brain registers a data point. I said I would do this, and I did. That becomes a neural imprint, a tiny signal that reinforces your sense of capability. These imprints add up. Over time, they become a memory system, an internal archive of moments when you followed through, overcame resistance, did something hard, or surprised yourself. And when you face a new challenge, your brain scans that archive and says, we've done hard things before. We can do this too. The opposite is also true. Every time you avoid action, procrastinate, or break a promise to yourself, your brain stores that too. It starts to treat your words, plans, or intentions as unreliable. That's how self-doubt grows, not from lack of ability, but from a lack of experiential evidence. The nervous system is honest. It only believes what it sees repeated. So if you want to increase confidence, don't focus only on motivation or mindset. Focus on small, consistent actions that build internal credibility. Confidence is less about how loud you are and more about how often you've shown up when it mattered. One of the most effective ways to start building this internal credibility is through what's called identity-based action. Instead of waiting to feel confident before you act as if the identity you want is already yours. You don't need to believe fully that you are disciplined, creative, or courageous. You just need to take the action that a disciplined, creative, or courageous person would take. Over time, the action reshapes the identity. Your nervous system starts to associate your behavior with that identity, and belief follows. It's not fake, it's foundational. Behavior shapes belief. Repetition makes it real. Tiny actions are especially powerful. People often think they need a massive win to build self-belief. But neuroscience shows that small wins are just as effective because the brain tracks frequency more than magnitude. The key is to set yourself up for a win every single day. That might mean doing one focused work sprint, completing one cold exposure session, or having one honest conversation. Each time you complete a task you said you would do, even if it's minor, you teach your brain that your word matters. This creates a positive feedback loop. Completion leads to belief. Belief leads to momentum. Momentum leads to greater action. Physical movement is one of the most direct and underused ways to build confidence through action. When you move your body, especially under resistance or in difficult conditions, you signal to your nervous system that you can act despite discomfort. This has deep evolutionary roots. For our ancestors, the ability to act under threat was essential for survival. Today, the threats are psychological rather than physical, but the mechanism is the same. Movement reduces stress hormones, boosts dopamine, and increases the brain's ability to learn from experience. It creates a state of readiness. That readiness becomes your baseline, and from that baseline, you are more likely to take other types of action, creative, social, or intellectual. Another powerful source of action-based confidence is skill acquisition. When you learn something new, especially something difficult, you create new neural pathways. The process of going from I don't know how to I'm starting to get it to I can do this is one of the most direct ways to shift identity. That's why learning is so tightly tied to confidence. Not because knowledge makes you special, but because learning changes how you see yourself. It gives you proof that you can adapt. That proof is essential, especially in times of uncertainty. Tracking your actions is another critical step. Your brain needs feedback. When you journal your wins, reflect on progress, or even just check a box next to a completed task, you create a loop that reinforces the action. This strengthens the memory and anchors the experience in your identity. You move from vague effort to concrete progress.